Greetings, everyone. Hey there. I know I look like I'm on on a stage set, but I'm at this funny um, hotel called the Quiet Mind Mountain Lodge, east of San Diego, and it's kind of like a slightly dilapidated, you know, lodge hotel, like in the boondocks, but it's filled with Tibetan art and artifacts, like Tonkas galore. There's a whole shrine room. There's like the old school library cases of like the Tibetan scrolls, like the long written scrolls that the guy. So it was the guy who started it was a Tibetan Buddhist who clearly had a lot of money and wanted to buy a lot of stuff. And it's got great books in the library. Usually they have like Robert Ludlum and stuff, and this has like super arcane Yogacara texts but it's also just kind of a funny, meat, like French roast coffee and whatever. It's just this funny place. So I'm kind of enjoying the weirdness of it. So I'm kind of coming up here just to get a little mountain air, and I'm going to go to the desert tomorrow. I haven't been to the desert in a while. So hope everyone's doing well. Just letting folks get in here a little bit. I hope the signal's good. I'm doing my best. Let me know if it's not. I don't know what else I would do about it. And but hopefully that'll work out. It seems like it's pretty robust. Hope everyone's having surfing the holidays. It's always like a tense time. Like I I've noticed more like ambient weird feelings, and I just sometimes go, oh yeah, it's just in the air. It's just a weird time. There's just like this extra pressure that's also can be awesome, and seeing people and excitement and love, and it's something different. Rituals, I'm looking forward to my New Year's and Christmas rituals that we've been doing for a while that are kind of non-standard, but still of the spirit of the time. And so I hope you have some fun stuff looking ahead. What should I talk about? Oh, just a couple of notes. One, just because I just had read about it and it's sort of fascinating. In the new edition of Lucid News, which is a solid psychedelic news source. Like it's the adults in the room. There's a lot of psychedelic news sources out there, and they're more serious, and there's near not much fluff. And there's a long piece about Maps getting held liable now for a wrongful death at a lightning in a bottle. And it's a complicated story. Other people were also responsible. But it was a very interesting, kind of inevitable story. And it sort of made me think about, some of what happens when there's a transition from the underground into legal domain. Now, something like this is almost inevitable. So the whole idea of like a Zendo or some kind of comfort station has been part of psychedelic culture since the 60s for sure. Certainly at Woodstock, they had places like that, like a place you go when you're freaking out and the people are kind of deal with you, and maybe they'll help you out physically, try to make you comfortable. Or maybe if you're really freaking out, they'll try to actually deal with it. But of course, it's all informal because it's all outlaw. And then like the Zendo at Burning Man gets more and more established, and it's more well known, and it kind of part of the infrastructure of the city alongside the medical group. And the medical group and Zendo work together, so people will show up to the medical group and they'll say, you probably should go over to the Zendo, and vice versa. So they have to be in communication. But of course, by being in communication, it makes them legitimate, and it makes them part of the infrastructure of care, which once it's legal, then becomes, object of liability. And, liability just runs the economy, particularly in America. I mean, America is an incredibly libelous place. And so many of the things like why is X the way it is like libel laws or libel or dealing with, what people say, what they can do, the forms you fill out, the assumptions about who's responsible. So in a way, there's something like this was kind of inevitable, but it's also just so hard to imagine what what a sort of above ground solution to kids on drugs at a festival would be. Like I don't know what that looks like. Treating everybody as if they're medically sick, because if in the off chance that they do get medically, have a medical condition, that you're going to get sued. So you have to not do kind of what you're doing, which is like trip sitting. And I don't know. It's quite interesting, and it also has some potential impacts on maps going forward. So that's just your little thumbnail of psychedelic news for the day. Other psychedelic news. I think most of you are elsewhere, but for those of you who are in the Bay, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be doing a 5-week in-person psychedelic. It's called Expanded Minds: Sacred Lessons from the Psychedelic Underground. And I'm doing it with my friend Christian Greer, who's also a PhD, who studies the counterculture and what he calls psychedelicism. And he's a very dynamic, forceful personality and speaker. And we're just going to team teach, marching through the decades from the 50s probably to the aughts, kind of talking about the underground and what sort of lessons it may have for us, and criticisms it may have for the contemporary psychedelic space. So when Christian and I were thinking about doing this, this is already, it's such an interesting, there's conundrums everywhere you go. We decided to not stream it and not record it and then put it out on YouTube. And Christian comes from more of an anarchist background, has done a lot of anarchist teaching, classrooms that are just in bars and whatever. So he has a real investment in that kind of thing. Chris put the link for it in the chat. Thanks, Chris. So it was an interesting question. So we were like, part of what it is that we both like teaching in a room. And, even here, originally, Psychedelic Sangha, Dharmanaut Circle was in person, and then we switched to online. And now, we have all of our relationships and friendship, and this is what we're used to, and I'm not going to change it, because this is what this evolved into. And I know many of you are distant. So I respect that. But at the same time, I'm really, I miss and really appreciate the in the room vibe, especially for teaching. And it's more fun for me because I can pick up kind of energetically where people are at. And it's sometimes more spontaneous, a little less lonely. Anyway, so we decided to do that, and we have no idea whether it's going to work or not. It might just be a total disaster. There might be like 2 people, and then I already got grief from somebody who was like, "This isn't fair to people who are handicapped, who can't be there," and da 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 da. And you're like, "Oh, I guess you're right." But the problem is, it's like that's the conundrum thing. If you could say, "Yeah, we'll record it and put it on YouTube for all the people who can't be there but really want to see it," and if that didn't sort of convince many people to go, it's kind of a hassle to get over to Berkeley on a Wednesday night. They're recording it. I'll just watch it later. And tons of people do that. And I don't know I don't know how you get those people to stop doing that. To say, yeah, commuting's no fun, but being in a room with other people who care about the stuff you care about, it is really fun. So that's why it's going to take this form. I'm sure other things I will do there in the future will also be streamed and recorded. I think this is a little bit more of an experiment, hopefully a little bit in the spirit of the topic. So that's some other psychedelic news. And let's see, how do I want to get into the topic today? I've been thinking and sitting and being with what I will call presence lately. And it's an interesting category. It's an interesting and vital kind of aspect of things. And one place to start is just the relationship between presence and paying attention. One of the things I like about like certain kinds of cultural things that aren't quote unquote spiritual, like going to a either like a classical music concert or a sort of avant-garde experimental concert or jazz even, where the music is difficult enough that you kind of have to pay attention to it. You can't just like groove to it, which is fun too. But there's a certain quality of attention in the room that becomes meditative, even if people aren't meditating. I've gone to some electronic, uh, you know, uh, avant-garde electronic shows where it's really quiet music, like very subtle microtones and overtones and strange pulses, and everybody's just sitting there, for like an hour and a half, just like taking it in. And there's an energy in the room that appears even though there's no like quote unquote spiritual intent, that people aren't meditating. They're just listening, but they're listening with a certain kind of quality. And that quality, one way of describing what does it open up, is this quality of presence. But presence is kind of an interesting term because it crosses the subject object divide. I mean, in a way, when you get deeper into meditation, one of the boundaries that becomes interesting is the boundary between subject and object, or my mind meditating, or this meditating consciousness, and whatever phenomena arises, and the relationship between them. And they ultimately, you get to some non-dual state and there's no distinction, I guess. People say that happens. I think I've tasted that on occasion, tripping and meditating, but I wouldn't make any big claims about it. But I can say that boundary becomes more permeable, more fluid, more subtle, more spacious, more kind of as if almost like it's like it has holes in it, like there are sort of non-dual dimensions to to the relationship between subject and object. And presence is one of those sort of categories or ways of practicing that go from both sides. On the object side, the way the world shows up, and the subject side, the way the mind or the spirit shows up. So what do I mean? Well, if you let's take the objects thing. Earlier, I was talking to Tim about objects, and he was sort of noting how despite his skepticism, he's becoming more sensitive to how certain objects have certain kinds of qualities, and you can sort of tune into them, and they have an effect. They have a role to play. You walk into a room that has certain kinds of objects. There's a vibe, not just because they look cool or they indicate something, signify something, but just the objects themselves. And so I'm in this funny, kind of janky hotel, but it's filled with these amazing objects. And so one of the ways of relating to objects is through their just theirness. One of the things that's cool about objects, even the banal objects right around you, your cup of water, your phone, your keys, whatever, is that they're just there. And that just there-ness, which can sound kind of banal, is also a window or a dimension of their presencing, the way they sustain themselves through time. And that if they have a character, like, there's something charming about that glass or ugly about that cup, that character or quality also partakes of their continued existence, their just there-ness. So when you're getting into presence, it's a way of saying, okay, rather than just going, yeah, there's an ugly cup on the table, it's like that ugly cup is doing ugly cup right in front of me. And there's a quality of showing up, almost of performing. You can imagine almost like as if all the objects around you are performing this still performance. And by attending to them, by focusing your attention on them, you are sort of recognizing or appreciating their performance. And that, for me, that feeling of appreciation for the performance of objects around you, particularly powerful ones or beautiful ones or spiritual ones or aesthetically interesting ones, evocative ones, but really for all of them, that particular power that they have of sustaining is what I mean by presence. You think about stage presence, and that's a really good quality, or that somebody has presence. So what is stage presence? Somebody walks on and there's something about the way they hold their bodies, their voice, their eyes, their costume, that you are drawn to them, and there's a kind of radiance, there's something attractive about that. It's easy to pay attention to it, you know, even without evoking like the idea of charisma. You can just say more simply that there's a way in which performances have a quality of presence when they're working, and that part of our enjoyment as audience members is that it allows us to attend to them rapturously or without chatter, to really be drawn up into the performance. But everything is kind of part of the stage, like this, like these curtains behind me. Everything's kind of part of the performance. Everything has a kind of stage presence. So part of, and for those of you just joining us, I'm talking about the quality of presence as something that to be cultivated both in the world, as something you perceive in the objects in the world and the things you confront, and as something to cultivate inside, because those two kinds of presences ultimately begin to talk to each other and even meld. So I've been talking about the object realm, and that in addition to appreciating objects for their qualities, there's a sort of there-ness behind the qualities that you both can touch and can't touch. There's something enigmatic in it. Let me explain. So I'm looking at this glass. I can see it. It's got qualities. It's transparent. There's water in it. It probably weighs about this much. These are all like qualities that I can appreciate by bringing my attention to this object. But in the there-ness of the glass, the way it doesn't move, the way that it has a kind of presence, there's something also I don't know. I don't know what it is. There's something special about it, even a charisma to it, even though if it's just an ordinary glass. So there's a way in which appreciating objects, and I'm really talking about physical objects because it's tangible, that appreciating objects it can be a way into appreciating their just there-ness, which is something that's paradoxical because it's both the actual thing that I see, that I can pick up and taste, and some additional quality that I can never get my hands around. And this is available all the time. It's like we're surrounded by objects performing their presence all of the time. And so what does it require on our side to be able to tune in to that enigmatic quality, which I hope I'm being clear about. I mean, we can have questions after this if it's not quite clear. I'm not sure if I'm exactly clear about it. But when we come back to the quality, how are we in relationship to these things? This has to do with our own, cultivation of attention, right? And so we say attention, pay attention. We think about attention being like a steady gaze, like where you're not distracted. Maybe there's a really sharp, focused attention, like if you're paying attention to a detail, a tiny little, speck of a molecule somewhere, and you're kind of looking at it, versus a very widespread sort of global attention that I might sort of spaciously open to the entire room and try to take it all in. So there are ways that attention can be focalized, but what's animating attention? Like we think about attention almost like a tool or like a tuning, like we're tuning our attention, but what animates it? What is vibrating inside the attention? To me, that's presence. And so when you're distracted and you're thinking all over the place and your attention is scattered, you don't really have that sense of presence inside. You are not really present to your own activity. You're pushed and pulled, you're random, you're scattered. But when you draw your attention forward, and if, let's say, you're just meditating on an object, you have a flower in a vase, you're looking at it, you're staring at it, but you're not just trying to like just do the eye thing. You're trying to really just take it in as if it was a sculpture or as if it was a gift from God or something. Like you're really just being there with this thing. You are also drawing your own attention together, collecting it. And when you collect that attention, it starts to hold and becomes more still. And that quality, that energy is your own presence. So you start to become present to yourself or in yourself through this act of attention. And ultimately where this goes is that the presence that the object world has, the presence that the whole room has, and the presence that you begin to tap into as you settle and collect and quiet and still, not intentionally, not driving, not pushing, but just allowing that process to develop, that presence in and that presence out begin to resonate and start to melt that boundary between subject and object. I'm not saying you're going to get to non-dual realization. Woo, here we go. Don't have to do anything. You're already awake. I'm not going to pull that on you. I'm going to say more that in practice, there are ways of thinning that veil and of being able to just be with a quality of presence that is no longer noticeably inside or out. That is, itself sort of opening up to the whole thing. And as I've often talked about here, one of the nice reasons to work this way is that you can do it through aesthetic appreciation. And by aesthetic appreciation, I don't mean like, taking a class in art history and knowing how to appreciate a Van Gogh or whatever. That's part of it. You can also do that, which is also cool. You can learn about, difficult music like, I don't know, Stockhausen, and like start to appreciate it in a different way. And through that appreciation, also develop these qualities of attention. But by aesthetic experience, I mean something much more broad and general, which is really just about feeling, just about feeling into things. What are the qualities that things have? How do they feel? How do they make me feel? We're surrounded by feels all the time. The kids say, the feels, I got the feels. We got feels everywhere, all day, all the time. Pleasant ones, unpleasant ones, bland ones, exciting ones. There's feels all the time. And feeling is an invitation for precisely this kind of attention and this kind of cultivation of presence. So you can do it all the time. It's not about being on the pillow. It's not about being in a certain kind of state. It does, as I'm presenting it here, require a kind of focused attention or a kind of, an ability to be with your experience or in relationship with the particular object in a sustained way. So I'm not talking about something that doesn't require a kind of sustained attention. It does, the way that I'm talking about it. But that's partly how you get into the magic, because, as any of us, when we started to meditate, what's the first thing you realize when you meditate? Or when you first pay attention to your mind on meditation, it's insane, right? It's crazy. You can't believe how crazy it is. It doesn't shut up. It's just going on and on and on and on. And even when you get into really like long, you've been doing it for a while, you get into subtle states, it still just comes up with bullshit all the time. It's just astounding. So it's constantly changing. And that's part of our experience of the mind, is that it's constantly changing. But when you practice with attention and presence, in a way, you're creating a sort of parallel development because as you get deeper into meditation, and not just meditation in the narrow, like on the pillow sense, but as you get deeper into practices of attention and practices of presence, which can also just be sitting in your garden, listening to the birds and not doing anything else. As you get deeper into these, you notice that while everything changes, the mind changes, the body changes, sensation changes, perception changes, there's something, sort of, maybe not a thing, but there's something that isn't changing. And maybe ultimately it's changing, but you start to recognize something like presence, where there's a continuity and a sustained quality of attention that kind of slowly and subtly develops its own momentum. And if you can recognize it, if you can recognize that quality of presence and sort of cultivate it, you can ride it into much more settled, quiet, and deep states of meditation, kind of through that cultivation, through that quality of presence, which is partly just quieting down. So when you sit there on the pillow by yourself trying to quiet your mind, it doesn't happen a lot. But if you bring in something to pay attention to, not just in a mechanical sense, like, oh, keep returning to the breath, keep returning to the breath, keep returning to the breath. Yeah, you can do it that way. But why not like really taste like what's going on with the breath? What does it feel like to breathe? Is the breath, wait, what is being evoked by breathing? What am I reminded by breathing? What does it taste like to breathe? Bringing that kind of aesthetic attention, the feels into the object of meditation, it just makes it more fun, more multidimensional. And I think it makes it easier in the long run. I mean, there's certain kinds of meditation, it's not true. There's schools that would reject what I'm talking about as you still get trapped, and if you want to get really deep, you have to kind of get more impersonal or whatever. And maybe that's true. But this is still pretty interesting to me, pretty fun. And so, yeah, so there's a way in which we can kind of bring in our more ordinary mind, and particularly anytime you're bored, you're stuck in traffic. Oh man, it's great. And it's really true. Like it sounds like it might sound like kind of a new age, like, oh, when you're in traffic, just be present to being in traffic, right? Sounds totally stupid. But, I don't know, I can't do it all the time, but I can do it part of the time. And it's actually kind of awesome because that quality of presence is everywhere all the time with you because it's kind of you. So, it has some fringe benefits of, helping with, patience and boredom and even a little bit of despair or disappointment. Anyway, I've thrown a little bit more abstract ideas than I normally do in this beginning talk because it's been on my mind. There are other ways to talk about it, but I just wanted to, before we sit, just open up and see if anybody had any questions or clarifying comments on this topic. Anything? All right. Well, good. Oh, wait.
Sorry, Eric,
Yes,
I got
Tim.
one just for jump in.
Sure.
So the word enigmatic is really powerful for me because it points to like there's a presence there that is difficult to put a name to. And I find myself very often wanting to practice and getting some joy from practicing, trying to put a name to that which is enigmatic, or like leaning into poetry to try and put a name to that. But I'm also aware that the minute you put a name to it, it's less enigmatic, or you lose something a little bit that way. What do you think of, yeah, putting a name to something like that?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge issue, and it kind of depends on what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it. Um, I love poetry, and you use the example of poetry rather than of science. Science also brings language to enigmas, but it does it in a certain way. In a way, in fact, you could almost define what does science do. It uses, I mean, it's an aspect of science that uses English words, It uses English words in order to make just describe things with as little enigma as possible. So it develops jargon, it develops very specific language. And if you learn that code, you actually know what they're talking about and you can do it yourself and everyone can agree on it. It's kind of amazing. But you use the word poetry, which is different because poetry has this quality where poetry about objects like the moon, when done well, even though you've read a thousand poems about the moon, something new comes through, something about the moon or something about the word moon or something about language comes through that is also enigmatic. So it's like you you take away some of the enigma, but you allow other elements to come to bear. So can become kind of almost like a chain. There's always another enigma that you can build off of, and you can either try to describe it the way like a literary critic will describe a poem in a way, kind of breaking it down and explaining why it works the way it does, like a scientist, or you can respond to a poem with another poem. So there, you're using language to concretize and to evoke, and in some sense to communicate your experience of an object to some degree, or at least it's an inspiration of it. And yet you're also kind of allowing other people to have another kind of enigmatic experience down the road. So it's a different kind of language. And if the words you use, you kind of know are sort of guesses, poems, uh, uh, you know, like what would I say? Like guitar solos, like they're jazz, so they are taking away some of that enigma perhaps, but they're also just sort of displacing it because it never really goes away. It just might get more subtle and more distinct. And it's the same thing with science. Like I can describe this glass scientifically all the live long day, but the enigma, the ungraspable aspect of it, the way in which it's outside of my ability to represent it or think about it or name it, is still there too. So I think judicious use of language is great. I think what's unfortunate about language is the way that it pretends that a description or even an explanation finishes the story. So you're like you're wondrously beholding the aurora borealis. And someone's like, well, yeah, it's just ions coming off of the solar storm hitting the ionosphere on top of the planet. And you're like, what? Like, I don't even know what to do with that. So in a way, that helps. I'm actually happy to know that. It actually doesn't take away from the experience. But I think there sometimes, and that's maybe not a great example because it's so obviously still cool, but there are a lot of ways that once we have words or an explanation, we use that to write off and not look for the enigma or not sense the enigma anymore. And so suddenly we live in a world without enigmas where all the objects are known because we know the glass is for drinking. If I drop it, it's going to shatter and I could cut my finger. I got to I can put wine in it, but I'm not going to put chocolate syrup in it because that's weird. So you just live in this world of like all these decisions and you don't try anymore. And that's a prison. So I think it's about kind of how you use language, and it's also, yeah, and language is also magic. Like when we think about magic spells, it's magic in the sense that, like what I was doing was using language to try to talk about pretty subtle states that I've experienced that may be fundamentally different than states that you experience, and yet for some of you, some of the time, things that I say allow you to have an aha moment. And maybe the next time you're sitting or the next time you're reflecting on your sitting, there's like a shift. And that doesn't mean that you and I are doing the same thing, but it does mean that language can have, even language around subtle and enigmatic things can have a productive, creative quality of sort of inviting and resonating and evoking that works. It works, or at least for some people, some of the time. And so that's another reason to use language. Like what would we do as meditation students if all of our meditation teachers went, yeah, it's just too subtle. I'm just going to pack it in and shut up now. And they occasionally do that. But if they did it all, if they all did it, we'd be sort of shit out of luck, right? So we kind of need that chain of language to keep us going, and then ways to set up language so that it deconstructs itself. And then or that's one of the appeals of drugs, of course, is that drugs uh, malform our linguistic categories and sometimes seemingly just destroy them, or overwhelm them so much that it's hard to language. And I think that there are other spiritual states that aren't the same as that. Sometimes I think it's too easy to collapse it, that there are other ways of kind of seeing through, and I haven't had this experience myself, but based on what others have said, seeing through the kind of net of words to something, ineffable, and that part of the way you get there is to kind of play with language, at least in some cases. But this is good stuff. I hope we talk more about this, or really anything, of course, as always. But let's sit for a spell. So, find your seat, turn off the camera if you want. Uh, get into your posture or favorite chair, or lie down if you want to. Um, hmm. Allow your restless body to settle, almost feeling this kind of exhalation of your skin, of your muscles, of your bones. And find a posture that suits your own process of relaxation. I often take you through the basics. I'll lay out. I won't do it entirely tonight, but have a sense of uprightness in the spine, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly tucked, pelvis slightly spilling forward. So you're balancing your spine in a way that allows all the muscles around the spine to relax. Starting at the top of your skull, just slowly, gently scan downwards. And as you go, just invite relaxation. Don't force it. Don't demand it. Just invite it. Down through your forehead, your eyes, the back of your skull, the muscles around your cheeks and lips, your throat, your shoulders. Really relax. And with that relaxation, you might notice that your breathing is coming sort of in sync with this process. Allow that, invite that in however it works for you, but continue to scan the muscles of your arms. You can feel the weight of your arms gently settling. Your hands, which hold so much tension, releasing, your fingers softening. There is some articulation. You're not becoming a blob, but as much as possible, while retaining your posture, allow things to settle. The chest especially can settle because it's breathing. So when it exhales, it just can fully release. And that release goes through down your diaphragm, down into your belly. So every time you exhale is another invitation to release. Feel that settling, collecting at the bottom of your spine, in your sit bones, or wherever you're settling, however you're sitting. Feel that weight and also that sense of being held. As you exhale, you can even feel the exhale sort of continue to sink through the belly, through the groin, sort of out, down into the earth. Allow a certain porous feeling to grow between your butt and the earth, kind of melting. So you're really emphasizing that settling quality throughout your body. And to carry it further, your legs down to your feet, your toes. Invite them to relax and to participate in this kind of delicious release of the exhale. Now shift your focus to the breath, and you can follow it where you will: nose, throat, chest, belly, or really allow it to radiate through your whole body. Since we've been sort of exhaling the whole body, you can breathe with the whole body. You'll probably have stray thoughts popping up. Just allow these to settle too. Don't push them away. Don't slice through them. Just allow them to settle. And when you find that you're caught in thought and you recognize it and you drop the thought or allow it to settle, as you return to your awakeness, see if you can notice something like a different quality of, I can only say, presence when you return from the thought. As if the thought is kind of a little vehicle. You get inside and you start going down like a little train, one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Oh wait, I'm in a train, and you hop out the window and you're in the land again. Not that you weren't present to the train, but there's a quality of openness, of freshness, of being here-ness. And just see if you taste something like that. So we'll just sit for a bit. Thoughts will arise. Allow them to settle. Allow the body to continue to settle. But see if you can notice that shift. And if you do find your thoughts quieting, and you do enjoy a kind of growing sense of concentration or awareness, or however you call it, See if you can tune into this quality of presence, of nowness in the body, in the mind, whatever comes to you. Even if it's just a word, play with it. This quality can also be accessed through the feeling of spaciousness, the sense that your body is not in space, but is space, that your mind is not looking into a space, but your mind is space. As we are distracted by thoughts and then awaken to our distraction and return to the object, as we keep doing that, we notice that that process keeps going in subtler and subtler ways. Even when the gross thoughts have sort of quieted down, there's still a way in which we become distracted. And more importantly, wake up again. Wake up to the presence that we already are experiencing. It's almost like falling back into the presence that's always there. Like into the arms of some being who's always got our back. If it helps, you work with your eyes open sometimes, you can open your eyes and gaze at whatever is before you and see if you can tune into the presence there. But if you don't usually do that, maybe leave it alone. But what we're really trying to tap into here is this sense of awake continuity that continues even behind distraction, so that waking up to distraction is returning to a presence that is already there. If you get ungrounded or confused, just return to the breath in a familiar way. Be with the breath like an intimate pet. Feeling into the breath, feeling into the body is a way both to ground and focus here, but also to tap into the presence of the body. How do they actually feel? Are they meat machines or energy fields, flows, pulses? Notice that as you tune into the energetic feelings of the body as part of the process of meditating, of developing concentration, of settling, that you only become more present to yourself, to your embodied, ongoing self. As the spaciousness moves through the body, through the environment, see if you can feel a shift in time. The, the continuity of presence has its own kind of time. And even if that doesn't quite make sense, notice the quality of duration or pulsation. Tune into any fluctuations, pauses, senses of slippage between the normal flow. Allow yourself to taste a little bit of timelessness. And now relax again, almost at like the beginning when we were relaxing our bodies, except now you're relaxing into this sense of presence. Anything that arises, events, thoughts, feelings, sensations, allow them to relax into this spacious, vibrating field of presence. Now, even if you didn't open your eyes, I ask you now to slowly open your eyes just a little bit. Don't overwhelm yourself with light, but really get a feel for the space around you. Notice how it appears. Perhaps it appears differently, a more intangible or surreal or evanescent or something. That whatever you're looking at is also participating in this presence. A presence that is not about what it is, but how it is now. Really relax into this. Just let go. All right, let's end the meditation there. Thanks everyone for going on the ride